wind. And I guess previous generations that would have been standing in that bad, wet, windy weather and probably cursing that weather that they were experiencing might never have thought that this might provide the future wealth of the country, that something that you can't even hold in your hands, like wind, could potentially bring so much opportunity to the west of Ireland, and the country as a whole, could potentially bring inward investment, bring jobs to this area, and perhaps even one day mean that this part of the world would become the biggest exporter, imagine that, of renewable energy right into Europe. Who knows? Maybe that's going to happen down the line. We'll talk about that today, because we're here in 2022 and you're all aware we're having this big debate about the climate crisis and debate around energy security and energy prices, and we're even talking about potential blackouts. We're talking about oil supplies, gas supplies running out, being cut off. You don't have that with wind. It's not going to dry up. It's not going to run out, but there are obvious challenges around renewables, and I guess we're going to look at some of those today and try and have a very frank and honest conversation about that. Now, you're going to hear some really interesting views and opinions. We've got two great panels lined up for you. The first one is examining the potential for opportunity, and then the second one looking at the experience from abroad and what we can learn from that. We're going to hear from the chairman of the Galway Harbour Company and the chairman of the board at Supernode Limited. After lunch, we're going to get the thoughts of the CEO of Galway Harbour Company, and we've also got that keynote address from the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. Now, just in terms of the panels that I mentioned, I think this is the point where you can get involved, because no doubt someone will make a point that you agree with or you don't agree with, or someone will say something that you want to add to, or you just want to hear a little bit more about that. So you can do that by getting involved yourselves. We'll have a microphone here in the room. Put your hand up towards the end of the panel discussion and we'll get a microphone to you. I would ask, because we've a lot of people joining us online, that you just wait till we get the microphone to you so that they can hear you online. That's the world we live in now in 2022. For those of you who are joining us online, you are very welcome. I think we've up to 100 of you joining us online. I'm just going to explain the Zoom functions to you. So on the bottom panel of the main interface, you will see chat, raise hand, and Q&A. So please feel free to use that chat box and to chat, and use the Q&A to ask questions of any of our speakers or panelists. And if you want to be anonymous, you can remain anonymous. You can click anonymous to ask a question and your name won't be shown. Now, if at any point, if you need assistance with any of the technology, you can contact the event moderator via the chat. They'll do their very best to help you, or you can email events@grooveyard.ie. Now, there's also an event app, and that contains the agenda for today, and there's an overview of all of today's speakers, biographies of them, and some bonus content. If you haven't already downloaded that app, you can go to the App Store now, or Google Play. Just search Renewable Energy Galway Port, or simply Galway Port, and use the email address that you registered for this event, and then you can create your own password to access that app. So if you have any difficulties, again, you can visit the registration desk and they will be very happy to help you. You can also chat with other attendees who may be joining online. And the event hashtags, by the way, even though I know all your phones are on silent because you're all very good, you can tweet away, and the hashtags are hashtag Port of Galway, hashtag Renewable Energy IRL, and hashtag Offshore Energy. And by the way, just to let you know, this event is being recorded, but you all look smashing, so you look fantastic in that. Now, will you please welcome the chairman of the Galway Harbour Company, Maurice O'Gorman, to officially welcome you to today's conference.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see everyone in person. Deputies, senators, councillors, city manager, participants, it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the board and the team of the Galway Harbour Company to this conference on the renewable energy opportunity for the west of Ireland. Ireland's ambition to increase the proportion of renewable electricity to up to 80% by 2030 includes a target to achieve up to 5 gigawatts of installed offshore wind generation. In the longer term, The goal is to achieve 30 gigawatts of offshore floating wind in our Atlantic waters, taking advantage of the strongest and most consistent wind speeds in Europe. To put this into context, 30 gigawatts represents 5 times our current consumption on the island of Ireland. The opportunity for renewable energy to create jobs, drive economic growth, provide clean power for our homes and industries, and in turn boost our local communities is truly immense. There are challenges. The Maritime Development Office review concluded that existing ports have several significant limitations to supporting offshore wind development. Our commitment to climate neutrality requires the development and upgrade of our port facilities. This can be done in an environmentally sustainable manner, in a manner that benefits our local economies and local communities. I foresee a very bright future and a green future for Europe, which will be powered by renewable energy from Ireland. I very much look forward to hearing from our speakers and panellists, and I wish you an enjoyable and stimulating day, and I hope that all of us leave here renewed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Maurice. Now, will you please welcome to the stage for our first panel discussion, the renewable energy opportunity for the West of Ireland, Thomas O'Sheacon. He's CEO of the Western Development Commission. Thanks very much, Thomas. Also, Liam Lacey, Director of the Irish Maritime Development Office. And joining us online, we have Vanessa O'Connell, who is Head of Inish Offshore Wind, and Kate Dempsey, who is CEO of Aqualicense and Ondine. And a reminder, you can put your questions to our panellists at the end of this discussion. So hopefully we'll get the guys up on Zoom in just a few moments. There they are, Vanessa and Kate. Thank you very much for joining us. Tomas, I might come to you first, because the west of Ireland has been the part of the country that has suffered so much lack of economic opportunity in the past, and it's synonymous with, high unemployment, high emigration almost seen as a sort of a release valve, and an area of the country that has largely been forgotten about. So when we talk about opportunity when it comes to renewable energy, where is the discussion and the narrative right now?
Well, I think first of all, this is a very welcome event, because one of the most important things is to begin that discussion, begin the engagement, not only with the people in the room and the people online, but I think really even more importantly, everyone not in the room, to ensure that across the Atlantic coast, all the way from Donegal down to Kerry and beyond, because this isn't only an opportunity for the west of Ireland, this is an opportunity, first of all, for Ireland as a whole, for the island of Ireland, for these islands, and indeed the EU, such is the scale of what's available offshore. So I'm certainly not here to identify within technical terms where the opportunities are, but as someone coming from an agency that has engaged over many years with communities, through our lending and investment in early startup companies, through alignment with public policy all along the coast in terms of identifying this opportunity and beginning to bring people into rooms like this and start the conversation about where we need to be in 10 years and beyond to capitalize on everything this offers. So a number of things I would draw to your attention. First of all, I think it's absolutely vital that these conversations that we're having here today not only are had in these rooms, but are had in a public forum, and that communities are involved. Mm-hmm. To ensure that we capitalize on what's available, to ensure that communities can benefit from that, either through dedicated funds, which is planned and which is being assessed and worked through at the moment, but within that communities are given models in which to work. And most importantly, that what it provides for communities is not just superficial benefits. While it's always welcome to see examples such as, playing pitches and playgrounds and things like that, mm-hmm. This should be an opportunity to provide assets for the community into the long term that can generate a source of revenue for those communities, to enable those communities to generate their own future, to indeed generate their own power, and begin to, through the transition to a low carbon economy, capitalize on all the benefits that are there. So from that point of view, and then more broadly in terms of the policy cohesion, the engagement of all the key stakeholders around the table, so many of whom are here, so many of whom probably are in Dublin and may to some extent need to be informed as to the appetite in the West So I think we need to engage on all fronts to make sure that the message gets out loud and clear, and to change the narrative around the West. We in the Western Development Commission have started on that road, but I see this as a very, very significant juncture for which to continue.
On the pure economics of it, Tomás, it would seem to be an easy sell in terms of, you know, inward investment and jobs, but nothing is pure economics. So you will come across people in communities, and I know we may have some here in the room today, they're unsure about it, and they're wondering about the downsides and the disadvantages to their communities.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think if you look at the discussion around the transition to a green agenda, it's hugely important that this doesn't become politicised. I think in many ways the discussion around climate change has now shifted to the events in Ukraine have meant that this is no longer an option or a time-bound consideration. Mm-hmm. This is now happening. The issue of energy security, the issue of self-sufficiency, all of those come into play and very much move it from something in the abstract in the future to something in the here and now. For communities, it's absolutely vital that, you know, you can see that the resources are being put in place along through the local authorities, through the likes of SEAI, through the other government agencies. Like, we see a role for the Western Development Commission in terms of facilitating the conversation to ensure that the leadership is there, not necessarily by us, but where there is leadership, to ensure that there is cohesion across the board. At its very simplest, and this is something that's uniquely Irish, I think you can have the debate about whether Clare should be first, or Kerry should be first, or Galway should be first. This is beyond...
We're not talking about hurling now.
Well,
here,
exactly,
no.
but that's exactly it. So it's important to move away from the individual village, town, county, begin to think as a region which is something beyond us, which is something that perhaps we've never done. And with that, then, secondly, to look at medium to long-term planning, because what's unique about today's conversation is we're having a discussion, for the most part, about something that will be happening beyond 2030. It's not something traditionally we've managed well to put the pieces of the jigsaw in place to ensure we can capitalise that. And I think if we can start that conversation today and get the alignment of the various stakeholders in place, it will be a good day's work.
Yeah, I think you're going to use that phrase, joined up thinking, that we all hate so much, but it's particularly relevant to this conversation. Liam, if I can bring you in here from the maritime point of view, I mean, you in your office, you're the sort of a balancing act, don't you, between kind of protecting maritime resources and the ecosystem that's there, but identifying opportunity and technology that will help that opportunity.
Absolutely. So we exist in the space where our role is to develop the maritime industry in this country. If anybody needed reminding about how important that industry is to the economy of Ireland, just look at what happened over the last two or 3 years as we moved into Brexit and then dealt with the consequences of Brexit. Maritime transport is vitally important. The role that our ports play is vitally important. But the development role comes with responsibilities, and the IMDO, my office, exists within the Marine Institute. So sustainability is sort of written into our DNA. So we will develop on a sustainable basis, having regard for the environment at all times. And we have an opportunity in the way we go about offshore renewable energy to do it in the most environmentally friendly way. This is a new industry for the most part in this country, and we can do it right. And I'm confident that we can do it right. It's in everybody's interest to do so, including developers, because bringing local, as Tomás was saying, bringing local communities with us in this endeavour is critically important. I would make the point that probably the single biggest contribution we can make to the environment, to cleaning up our environment, is to make this transition to offshore renewable energy. And I think that, you know, I think that's generally accepted and understood. Now we're actually grappling with, well, how do we go about it? In terms of the development piece, the development of offshore renewable energy can't happen in this country until our ports develop to provide the infrastructure.
And we have a port policy, haven't we? And that has been published recently.
We have a policy on the provision of ORE infrastructure and the facilitation of that industry by our ports, which was just published by Minister Ryan in December of 2021. And that document is clear. It gives me great clarity in terms of discharging our mandate and in terms of what we have to do. It says, for example, that there will be a multi-port approach to delivering the solution. There is no one port in Ireland that can solve this problem. So ports must come together. I had the opportunity to visit sites where offshore renewable energy is being developed. And the scale of the infrastructure that is required is very significant indeed. There's a possibility that within the solutions that come from Ireland, that we bring ports together as a network of ports to deliver the total solution that's required for the Irish economy.
Yeah, because all ports aren't equal. I mean, we're not talking about one homogeneous. When I think of Killybegs, I think of fishing.
Yeah.
When I think of Galway port, I think of shipping. Am I right in saying that? So each port has different potential, and certain ports can only handle certain areas.
Exactly. So certain ports will have geographic advantages, and proximity is a significant determinant as to where developers will locate their shore-based operations. Being close to the site of a wind farm de-risks the operation, so they will want to do that. But so too are issues like depth of water, the availability of quay space, generally access issues both from the seaward side but also on land through road and rail. All of these issues come into play in terms of where developers will elect to locate their activities. If developers were putting a wish list together for floating wind off the west coast of Ireland in terms of what a port requires, they would probably look for things like depth of water of a minimum alongside of 12 metres. They would look for 450 to 700 metres of quay wall that's reinforced to handle the very significant loads that will be handled over quay walls.
So that means a huge amount of development, doesn't it?
It means huge development. To give you an idea of the scale of the development, Belfast has the Don facility, which is has built out wind farms, about one wind farm a year, that involves putting about 100 turbines in the water. 30 gigawatts requires us to put 3,000 turbines in the water at that level.
3,000?
3,000. Now, turbines are going to get bigger, so that number will come down as the technology changes. But the scale of the operation is absolutely enormous. In order to do that, we would require probably 3 or 4 facilities of the same scale as the Don facility in Belfast to be operating constantly for probably the next 15 or 20 years to deliver that type of capacity to the Irish electricity grid.
All right, I'm going to bring in Vanessa here, and I hope you can hear us okay there. Vanessa, you might give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. I know you've a huge amount, you've a huge amount of experience yourself in your own company. Will you tell us about the company and what it's involved in, Vanessa, in this country, and what projects you're potentially looking at in terms of wind renewable energies?
Morning, Colette. It's great to be here with you, and hopefully everyone can hear me clearly. I'd love to be there in person, but the schedule would not allow. So yeah, great to be here with Kate, Liam and Tomas, and already hearing really great insights from Liam and Tomas. Looking forward to getting into the discussion later. Would also like to thank Conor, the Port of Galway team, for inviting me to take part. And as you said, Colette, I'm head of Inish Offshore Wind. We're an Irish renewable energy firm. We officially launched last year with the backing of Temporis Aurora Fund and the Irish Strategic Investment Fund, amongst others. And it really was the scale of ambition and investments which helped me to decide to return home to Ireland last year to head up this venture. I've got 10 years of experience working in the UK offshore wind industry with Ørsted, previously Dong. Liam, you just mentioned them in terms of the Belfast port. They're now called Ørsted. And I worked on Hornsea 1. I was on the leadership team in the construction phase and headed up the asset management and operations for Hornsea 1, which is currently the largest offshore wind farm in the world, according to the Guinness Book of Records. I think it's going to be passed out by Hornsea 2 next year, so I won't get to hold that glory for too long. So yeah, I've had a good experience and hands-on experience with the development of offshore wind in the UK. And I'm really excited to be part of this growing sector in Ireland, which I think has so much potential. I think we also have lots of great people, and there's a lot of great energy. I was just at the Wind Energy Ireland conference yesterday and here today. There's really a lot of energy and commitment to make the change that we need. So all the people on the panel today, all the people who are here in the G Hotel, and those who are listening from the different parts of the country, you mentioned there's about 100 people listening in remotely. So one of the main reasons that I came home was really, the passion that I see within the people of Ireland and the potential. And within Inish Offshore Wind, we're building a strong team, and we have ambitious plans for what we're going to do over the next years and up to 2030. I think we need to really take note that this is the long game. So we need to start now. These are huge infrastructure projects that take years to build. Working on Hornsea, it was a 10-year project. So I think we all need to be patient but be committed for the long term. So within Inish, we've got plans to develop a pipeline of 4 gigawatts of offshore wind, and recognise that won't all be by 2030. So we've got a target to commission at least 1 gigawatt by 2030. We have 5 projects all around the country, but 2 of those projects are on the west. So we've got Munster and Kerry. We've got 1 in the south called Kinsale, and then we've got two on the east, Leinster and Wicklow. So yeah, I suppose from my perspective, it's the backing that we have. We've got the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund. They've got a significant stake in our success. And for me, it's not just about, the professional side of things. I'm also really personally invested in it, as I get a lot of people here today are also. We all know about the climate action and the emergency around that, and then that's just been amplified by what's happening in Ukraine and the energy crisis that we're already facing. But for me, I think we also need to focus on what can be the economic benefits and the potential to create a whole new industrial sector for Ireland and for Irish people to benefit from that in terms of the jobs that we'll create in Ireland, but also the capacity that we will build within our people and within our companies to export abroad. Ireland is and always will be a small open economy. So there's a huge opportunity here, but there's also going to be an explosive opportunity over the next, well, let's say 100 years probably, in terms of this transition that we need to make. So for me, it's all about collaboration, and it really is these type of events that are so important. It's the start of these conversations that we're having to bring this sector into reality, and I think it's already mentioned, getting the stakeholders together, getting an aligned sort of vision of where we want to go, and then taking action to get there. So yeah, just great to be here, and yeah, looking forward to the rest of the conversation, and looking forward to hearing what Kate has to say.
So Vanessa, can I ask you, you have a number of projects on the go, as it were, in Ireland. What are you looking at here on the West Coast?
We've got 2 projects. We've got the Munster project, which is off Kilkee, and then we've got the Kerry project, which is off Kerry. So both of those projects have a potential capacity of a gigawatt each. I think from our perspective, floating is certainly part of what we're looking at, but we're looking at the feasibility of fixed bottom. So we would very much see that the potential to be able to bring these projects forward within the decade and into the early 30s, based on a technology that's already existing and being proven around the world.
So from a private company point of view then, Vanessa, what are the risks involved in this kind of thing? Because, I mean, on the face of it, there is this sort of bonanza of wind, if you like, to be exploited, but there's clearly risks and challenges from your point of view. So what are the key ones?
For me, I suppose some of the key challenges, we're seeing a lot of progress in terms of the policy side in Ireland, and that's absolutely fantastic. We got the MAP bill that was published at the end of the year, and we're seeing very quickly the government sort of ramping up the process to get MAC, the Maritime Area Consent, sort of allocated for those phase 1 projects. And what I'd like to see then is, the phase 2 projects then also sort of being able to come through and getting that policy certainty. I think some of the challenges are well known. It's around grid, it's around our planning system, getting the resources that we need to enable those entities to be able to deal with what is going to be quite a lot of applications coming through and wanting, to get their projects built. So I think there's an enormous challenge there in terms of resourcing. And I would go back to what I'm really passionate about is working together. It's not the government, it's not the industry, it's not the communities, it's all of us working together and agreeing what our individual roles are, that we can then, align ourselves around a sort of overall vision for what this is going to be for Ireland and how we can deliver it.
All right, Kate, I'm going to bring you in at this point. Will you tell us a little bit about Ondine and Aqua Licence? Because I know you do an awful lot around public consultation and planning, and a lot of those kind of compliance and sticky issues, if you like, around renewables.
Hi, Colette. Thank you all. Thank you for having me, and I'd like to thank the Port of Galway and Conor for inviting me here today, as Vanessa did. Yes, the two companies that you mentioned, both Aqua Licence and Ondine, we are Aqua Licence being very involved in the marine planning side of not just offshore renewable energy, but also large-scale offshore aquaculture, around licensing, permitting, and environmental reporting to support those industries. And Ondine is really it's a purpose-made company to deliver on services that are required for offshore renewable energy in terms of geophysical, geotechnical, environmental, actual marine surveying. So both companies work hand in hand insofar as Aqua Licence will plan the required surveys, and Ondine can then obviously move into the next stage, which is to carry out the surveys. But yeah, so both of those companies do. I suppose both of the companies really give an impression of, I suppose, in the context of this conference today, the wider opportunity that is available in offshore renewable. It's not only about developing these offshore renewable energy farms, it's also the opportunity that can be harnessed by these rural coastal communities in terms of the type of job that is created, the number of jobs that are created, and what services are required that are sometimes seen as ancillary to the actual build-out of farms. And I think probably both Aqua Licence and Ondine are a good indication of what can be created. Aqua Licence, I began in 2019. There are 10 employees within that company. And Ondine, we began last year, and already it supports up to 75 full-time equivalents. So between marine crew and then our own full-time staff, that being up to 40 people. So very quickly you can start to see the type of opportunity that then becomes available through the development of offshore wind. I suppose my message here today is that yes, the opportunity is large and there's opportunity going into the future. There's also opportunity now to be had if it's harnessed properly by what we, as Vanessa said, what we cooperate and come together to create.
And Kate, I mean, you spoke about, you know, planning and compliance and all of these issues. I mean, that word planning, we don't have a good reputation in this country, and there has often been a lot of problems around that. In terms of all of that stuff that companies have to go through, where are we right now? Because I know certainly in the past there were reports in various newspapers about companies pulling out of here because it was just too complex, the whole area. And are we looking at streamlining it?
Yeah. I'm picking up some of your question, Colette, so if I don't answer everything, it's probably because I haven't heard a part of it.
Okay.
What I picked up from that was, you know, are we improving in terms of being able to be compliant with the relevant policies and regulations that are in place? And I suppose Colette kind of, or not, we kind of spoke about it earlier, where, you know, policy is improving with the delivery of the MAP Act and really the guidelines that have been set out in relation to MAC since then, certainly for phase 1 and the consultation then for phase 2. What has become apparent is that, you know, through marine spatial planning and the subsequent policies put in place by our government, it means that there is much more streamlined and clear-cut requirement around compliance. When you know exactly, you know, as a developer, when you know exactly what it is you have to comply with, it's understandable and you can achieve that. Where there's any ambiguity, that then becomes challenging. But I think certainly our government has made enormous efforts and strides to ensure that you know, a very transparent and visible policy is being created that offshore renewable energy developers can obviously follow. And it's changing all of the time. We're still, you know, there's going to be new processes set out for perhaps phase 2 max that might be somewhat different to phase 1. But one thing is for sure, there is a consistent message from government that they want to deliver on offshore renewable energy, that they want to work with developers and communities and the wider, stakeholder population to ensure that, as we move forward into actually developing these farms by 2028 or 2030 and thereafter, that we're doing it with everybody's insight into how the policies are created, making things an awful lot easier for developers, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, Tomás, you would think, given the discussion we're having in terms of climate crisis and the debate around energy price and security, that companies would be at breakneck speed trying to get to the west of Ireland and invest here. Is that what's happening in the background, and is there anything that might be preventing them from investing in this side of the country?
So I think, first of all, there's significant ongoing engagement from a number of different countries, both internationally and within Ireland, where people identify and observe the opportunity that's there. But I think both Vanessa and Kate have touched on very important things. If you take, in the first instance, let's say Vanessa's story, where she has gained the experience abroad and has come back and now is in a position to take a leadership role within this area. I know my colleagues in Enterprise Ireland are very focused on the idea of creating a generation of those that are skilled and educated and have significant experience now in the areas where there's lots happening, the UK, in Denmark and other spots, so that they can then come back and take this leadership role in 10 years' time. And I think
as
that's
opposed to outsourcing all of these potential jobs to other countries. I mean,
very true. And if you look at the history of foreign direct investment over the last 50 years in the country, where it has worked best is where the site leads over time have come from Ireland. So they have a clear understanding about the opportunity, they have a clear understanding of the environment in which they operate. And I think if we have those leadership roles from people who fully understand the way the system operates, who fully understand the opportunities within it. And then I think, as Kate correctly identified, and I think one of the most important things to come away from today, and I think Liam touched on this as well, that communities here, it's very important that communities are not seen as something to be overcome or a burden or a yoke that needs to be shackled to where this is going.
yeah.
So
But
if
there
I give you the example,
will be pushback there. You see, isn't this the?
Well,
I mean,
there-
maybe if you're a fisherman, right, or maybe if you're living along the west coast of Ireland, you might be saying, I mean, it's the old argument about these big ugly wind turbines. You know, whatever about jobs, this beautiful natural resource that we have all along the west coast of Ireland is going to be blighted by them.
no, I think I wouldn't disagree with that in one instance, but I think the other thing is, let's take the example, let's say we in the Western Development Commission led the rollout of the National Hub Network, which with the confluence of remote working, you can see where this isn't something that we went out and announced we're going to build all these 400 hubs. These were in existence. Mm-hmm. These were communities that had taken on their own initiative, that have the entrepreneurial guile, they have the entrepreneurial appetite to take these opportunities when they come. So I think if we look at this in the same way, use networks like that where there is an appetite to try new things, to take on an element of risk, but we have to help them with that funding is available, as Vanessa's case showed, that skilled individuals are available to take that leadership role, and then that the ownership comes from within the communities. It is absolutely vital, as you mentioned, whether it's tourism interests, whether it's offshore, whether it's fishermen, whether it's environmental interests. And it is a challenge for all of us in this room, not to take that as an obligation, but to take the opposite step and see it as an opportunity to lead the way in this. Because I think we are past the stage of looking at environmental or community or vested interests as something that should be a blockage to what we need to do, to work with them, because ultimately there is an opportunity for all of us in this.
Liam, can I talk about infrastructure for the moment? I mean, I'm thinking of the Corrib gas pipeline, right? And I know that's at the other end of the spectrum when we're talking about renewable wind energy. But any of the infrastructure that is there at the moment, is that capable of being used then and turned around for renewable wind energy?
It's capable of being used to an extent,
Right.
Colette, but the scale of the development that we're about to undertake in Ireland cannot be accommodated by existing infrastructure. Okay. That's the problem. So we have to build new port infrastructure in order to deliver. And port infrastructure has to come before anything else happens. You know, we need to put the port infrastructure in place. And we have a window of maybe 4 or 5 years to get that in place so that the building can start in 26, 27. That's the sort of timeline that's needed in order to deliver on our 2030 targets. It can be done. The infrastructure that's required is pretty ordinary in terms of what ports do. It's standage area within ports and quay walls. Ports have done this before. The ports that are likely to succeed are ports that have deep water.
Which ports are they now?
Well, on the west coast, ideally, Shannon Foynes, Cork has naturally occurring
Okay.
deep water. Other ports may have to engage in dredging activities within ports to develop deep water, but that's where the naturally occurring deep water is at the moment. And then you need very significant storage for the components that are going to go into the wind turbines and the floating platforms when they go out to sea.
How far out to sea are these floating platforms?
Well, it can be up to, say, 20 kilometres.
20,
It could happen.
And then the storage, whatever about harnessing then the wind power, is the storage out there as well?
You probably wouldn't do that, so the storage is required closer to the port,
Right.
where the components will be assembled, floating platforms will be built. It's possible that these floating platforms could be built abroad and towed into Irish ports, but we would be losing a supply chain opportunity there if we allow that happen. I think that the expertise probably exists in Ireland to take some of that particular pie and bring jobs to Ireland. You see, I think that the ORE industry is inevitable in this country. We are going to have a successful ORE industry. The issue that we're debating now, I feel, is what's going to be the level of our success? How many jobs can we create? How much of a positive impact can we make on the Irish economy? And we will be able to do that if we put the appropriate port infrastructure in place to allow this industry to commence. And in putting that infrastructure in place, having an eye on the supply chain opportunities that exist for the development of the platforms themselves. It probably is the case that the turbines will be manufactured elsewhere and brought into Irish ports to be assembled, but at a particular scale, probably above 15 gigawatts as a sort of industry benchmark, an opportunity begins to emerge for constructing wind turbines here in Ireland. I think that's probably more of a remote possibility than other supply chain opportunities. It's not just the turbines themselves and the flotation devices. It's the cabling, it's the mooring systems and so on.
You have to transmit all this power back.
Exactly, and that is a huge task as and of itself. The substations that are going to have to be built out at sea, to bring that cabling together and transmit it efficiently into the grid ashore. So all of these elements give opportunities to our ports. And very encouragingly, Irish ports are saying, we're interested, we want to do this. The developers are saying we're interested in doing it here in Ireland because that de-risks the operation for them and probably controls costs a bit better. So it's in everybody's interests on the developer side and on the port side to make this happen here in Ireland. And for our ports, the opportunity is to develop the sort of infrastructure that I'm talking about, which in some instances will be able to complement the future demands that will be placed on ports in terms of trade and tourism and the more mainstream activities that take place in Irish ports.
I'm just seeing a question coming in online here, Liam. The supply chain gain, will it be local? Well, you would hope so.
Yeah. I think that, more so than virtually any industry, the natural resource for this exists around the coast. It's geographically dispersed around our coasts. So, there are opportunities there to have local benefits from building out these wind farms. If we look at the operations and maintenance element of offshore renewable energy, it's in the interest of everybody that would happen locally and that you minimize the transit time from the operations and maintenance port out to the wind farm. That makes things more efficient, cheaper, safer, and so on. So, those benefits will accrue locally. I was in the port of Wicklow recently, and Wicklow have signed up with a developer to become the operations and maintenance port for a particular wind farm. And I would see more of that happening around the coast, with smaller regional ports probably attending to the operation and maintenance element, and then the larger ports dealing with the construction and deployment.
All right, Vanessa, will you look into your crystal ball there and pretend it's 2030? What are we going to be looking at? Are we potentially looking at the west coast of Ireland being the biggest net exporter of energy into Europe? Would it happen that soon?
I would love to say it would happen that soon. I think we need to probably be a little bit realistic. I think we'll be on the very strong start of that journey. You know, if we're commissioning projects, you know, by 2030, you know, we're already seeing some challenges of meeting our 5 gigawatt targets, but I don't think we can afford to miss them. I think we all need to come together and really reach those targets, and that could see part of the West being developed with that. We've got the one Scared Rocks phase 1 projects, but then there's the projects we're developing and others. And for me, there's no reason why the West can't be part of that opportunity up to 2030, but then certainly beyond. And coming back to the point in terms of ports, you know, it is critical that the investment is made to ensure our ports are ready for the opportunity in time. And I do see it as a little bit of a chicken and an egg sometimes, you know, because from a port perspective, they need to see certainty on the pipeline of projects. And from a developer perspective, you know, they can't be making the commitment until they have certainty on the project. So you have a bit of a challenge there. And I think we can look to our neighbours in the UK, you know, they didn't necessarily get this right. They're now learning lessons that you need to have government support in the ports. So for example, you're seeing in the UK an announcement in last year, I think it was, for under 100 million, which will be invested in Humber and Teessides to upgrade the port. That's coming from the governments. And I know there's no really easy answers on this, but I think this is something that, again, we need to come together as an industry and government is how do we solve this chicken and egg? You know, the ports need to be ready. We need the investment, but we also need the certainty of projects. And until we have the certainty of the projects, can the government step in to be able to make the investments needed? You know, these are conversations that we need to have. And I think already the work's starting to be done in terms of understanding where the investment should go. That's coming from Shannon Foynes. You're seeing Doyle Shipping Group and Port of Cork all putting out sort of proposals of what they can do, but they need the help. And I think it's back to us all working together to sort of figure out what the solution is and how we can solve the problem.
Kate, can I ask you, in Ondine and in Aqua Licence, and in particular in Ondine, what sort of technologies are you using, what sort of innovations are you using in terms of renewables?
Can you just repeat that, Colette? Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just saying within Aqua Licence, but in particular with Ondine, your company, Kate, what sort of technologies and innovations are you using to help in terms of renewables? Did you get me okay there?
I think pieces of it, but I think what you're asking me is what kind of technologies and innovations are we using in Ondine? I suppose one of the overall focus of Ondine is really to provide surety to the projects in terms of data quality. So we always strive for best-in-class data, so that projects, when they're actually planning and designing where these turbines will go, will have concrete information to base those plans upon. In terms of the technology we use, it's very far-reaching. We are constantly looking for technology that can improve our data quality. I suppose probably important to, an indication of that would be the type of drill that we use. So our intention in 2023 is to utilize a subsurface drilling capability, which is obviously more environmentally friendly, but also produces better, much better data than you may find from other types of drill deployment. So that's kind of the geotechnical side of what we do. We already acquire data using our survey plane, marine mammals and birds, and we have a geophysical suite of equipment and capabilities within Ondine as well. I think probably to give, there's a couple of things that, and I hope it's okay to talk about these, a couple of things came up that sparked my interest in this conversation. One was in relation to the fishermen, because in Aqua Licence, we certainly engage fishermen all of the time, and their concerns are definitely related in the strongest possible terms, and rightly so, because obviously as offshore wind develops, it needs to share that marine space equitably with the fishermen that are already fishing in the areas and have a type of historical right to continue to do so. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I've noted about those fishermen is they are genuinely looking at what the opportunity then becomes for them. How can they take their skills and huge experience in the marine space and translate that into potential jobs that may be available to them and for the generations to come after them in the offshore renewable space. So the conversation around, you know, CTVs or O&M and the type of vessels that we may use as we move forward in Ireland, and the capability of ports to be able to hold those type of vessels is very, very important. And it also comes back to being able to convert their huge experience and their license to be a fisherman or a skipper into the required, I suppose, certifications to be a pilot of those O&M vessels. So that's a really simple thing that I think could be addressed and create a huge amount of opportunity and really help to harness the skills of our existing marine industry. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was that obviously in comparison to the west of Ireland, or in comparison to the east of Ireland, the west really doesn't have as developed a grid infrastructure as the east coast. So what I'm saying by that is the opportunity in the west, it's not just about ports and services, it's also about how much energy can we actually bring on to the grid. And there is a limited amount at the moment, but I know that there are plans to upgrade certain networks. But one thing that I don't want to be left out of this conversation today is the potential to generate energy and then convert that into green hydrogen from these offshore wind farms, because that is something that doesn't necessarily need access to grid. And that is an opportunity for the West that it certainly could be realised with the current grid infrastructure in place. So the conversation around offshore wind is much wider than whether it's static or floating. It's actually about, does this project fit in with the overall scope or you know, the overall facilities and availability of services in those marine communities. And so I think a number of projects along the West Coast, or I know a number of projects along the West Coast are certainly very focused on the generation of hydrogen, and that in itself is another enormous opportunity for the West.
All right, I want to bring in you, Liam, there, because you were nodding when Kate was talking about the fishermen and concerns they have and the conversation she's having.
Exactly, and at a relatively recent conference in Cork, that matter was addressed by the Chief Surveyor, and in a very progressive way, they're looking at what can be done to recognise those certificates and use them on some of the service vessels that we're talking about. Now, there's a bit of a way to go in that, but the Marine Survey Office are being proactive in that regard, and that's very good news. The point that Kate finished with there in relation to hydrogen is vitally important, because in many respects that's where our huge opportunity is, that if we can't connect through interconnectors to the European grid, how do we get the energy to Europe in a different way? And there is and will be growing demand for green hydrogen.
Yeah, and I know in our panel in the afternoon, Gordon is going to talk a little bit about his hydrogen experience, so we will get to that. I think we have a question at the back of the room. Have we lost Vanessa? Has she gone from us, folks? No, she's still there, because I only have Kate on screen there. Do we have a question at the back of the room? Yeah, and I think you have the microphone there. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Wait just one second till we get your microphone on, because I know there's people online who are interested in what you're going to say. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Noel Stapleton here from MKO.
Hi, Noel.
Question for the panel. In terms of the opportunity in the West, and for Galway in particular, what steps need to be taken now by the industry in the West and by the port in particular to move the opportunity on in 2022?
Do you want to take that, Liam?
Sure. I think that the management of the Port of Galway know this very well, and they have advocated for offshore renewable energy off the West Coast very articulately in recent years. So when I mentioned earlier on that there will be a multi-port response to the provision of infrastructure, Galway is in the mix, and Galway will go and compete with other ports, dealing with developers, carving out its niche, identifying what demands within the overall provision of infrastructure or along the supply chain Galway can meet. And I think that there's reason to be optimistic about those opportunities for the Port of Galway. So all that remains to be decided as the ports and the developers, and this was an issue that came up in the discussion, this sort of chicken and egg standoff sort of situation. We published a report in 2018 which updated the previous report but dealt with that specific issue and the need for commercial discussions to happen immediately between developers and ports. Ports can't build infrastructure without specifics from a technical point of view. What exactly is required in ports? It would be disastrous for ports to anticipate what's required and get it wrong. So already there are developers signing MOUs with ports to become specific about those issues and getting that process started so that ports can start to answer those demands. Again, just linking back to a comment made earlier on, there are applications in the Connecting Europe facility process, which is a European funding mechanism, from 4 Irish ports for developments to take place. That's very encouraging. That window is closed for this year, but that CEF funding mechanism reopens next year and the year after and makes funding available for studies to be carried out, which covers 50% of the cost, and later for infrastructure to be built, and the mechanism will cover 30% of the cost. So it's up to ports to make applications to that funding mechanism if they have viable projects. The mechanism, in a way, whittles out, what are and what are not viable projects. So it's good from that point of view.
Okay, I think we're nearly coming up on time. We've probably time for one question. Yes, yourself. Now, we just wait till we get the microphone to you so those who are joining us online can hear you. I think we've lost Vanessa, have we?
Gurmil Margaret Carrier, look, Marta Fuitsa with the rest of the Gaeltacht. I'd like to respond to a couple of comments that have raised by the panel. Liam firstly mentioned the need for ports to work together. As somebody who's worked in the servicing of the offshore industry, both oil and gas and offshore, for quite a number of years, I don't think we in Ireland realise the scale of the possibilities here, nor of the scale of the work that can be done. And we in Ireland have been very good at competing with each other and dragging from one to the other. The opportunity here is for us to pull together. So Liam made reference to Foynes on the west coast, and there's going to be a need for a network of ports working very, very closely with each other, supporting each other with the synergies of what each can provide for the offshore industry. And those ports will include Foynes and Galway, Russellville and Killybegs. And unless we move to work with those ports together, there will be issues, there will be problems, and there will be equipment being brought in from overseas over very dangerous waters, which nobody wants to do. So we should do it locally. You mentioned yourself supply chain. The reality of life is that there are many, many people from Connemara and other parts of the Gaeltacht, but from Ireland in general, who are out in the North Sea, who are in the Gulf of Arabia, who are out in Korea, working today in this space, and they're all looking for really good opportunities to come home. And there are Irish companies with intellectual property who are looking to develop into this space. So the reality of life is that there are huge opportunities. And what we need above all else is that we pull together as a team, the ports included. More importantly than that, you asked the question, Chairman, about planning. Mm-hmm. By law, there are 17 senior ministries in this country. If you actually count through them, there are probably 2 that are not at all involved in the marine. And even then, they have some little involvement. That's the Department of Children, the Department of Justice. Everybody else, every other ministry, has increasing roles and parts to play in the marine. And unless those ministries pull together and act as a team for the benefit of Ireland Inc., we will miss this opportunity. And planning is key part of this. And if you look at what's happening with any of the wind energy developers coming in, they have to deal with the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government for foreshore, the Department of Energy for energy licenses, links into the electricity network, the Department of Marine to deal with the fishermen, the Department of Rural and Community Development to deal with the islands and local areas, the Department of the Gaeltacht to deal with the those of us in the Gaeltacht, and I could go on.
Yeah, I was about to say, as you go through them.
So the point is, we need to pull together. You asked, was there infrastructure in the country which is available to support the offshore wind? And several people have mentioned hydrogen, and you mentioned Corrib. And the really interesting point here is that we can produce hydrogen on the seabed from the floating windmills off the seacoast. We can put it into pipes, and we can connect to subsea into the gas pipeline that goes into Corrib, goes into Bellacroy, which happens to be in the Gaeltacht, and which links directly to Europe.
The irony of that.
So I've been speaking about marine opportunities for about 40 years, and most of the time people's eyes glaze over and they say, oh Christ, here he goes again. We're an island. We now have opportunities. The eyes are not glazed over. We've been sea blind. Here's our opportunity to be the Gulf of Europe. But we have to pull together to do that. And I'm asking, with all of the passion in my body, that we pull together, work together, and deliver this opportunity, because it's absolutely fabulous.
Well, what a wonderful contribution to end on. Thank you very much for that. I think time has beaten us in terms of questions, because we have a lot to get through. I think we lost Vanessa a little earlier on, but I want you to
here.
thank... Oh, you're there, are you? Sorry, but I can't see you. I can hear you. How 2022. I want to thank my panelists. It was a really interesting conversation. I know you're going to continue this conversation perhaps over lunch. So thank you indeed to Vanessa O'Connell, to Kate Dempsey, who joined us online, and also to Liam Lacey and Tomás O'Sheacon. It was really... You want to say something, Liam? Yes. Yes.
Final comment, which is to thank everybody in the Port of Galway for arranging today's event and for inviting me and I suppose everybody else along to speak, and to commend you for your leadership in this area. Mark White spoke about, working together, and I think you're making a very serious contribution to that working together.
All right, and I'm sure you will continue that conversation over lunch. So thank you very much, folks. I really do appreciate your contributions.